Today, I want to invite you to explore a powerful mindset shift, one grounded in neuroscience and human behavior, that can fundamentally change how you respond to life's challenges. Imagine training your brain to act as if nothing bothers you, not because you're indifferent or disconnected, but because you've rewired your neural circuits to maintain calm, focus, and control regardless of external turmoil. When we learn to embody this state, we tap into the brain's incredible capacity for resilience. This isn't about suppressing emotions, it's about engaging neural pathways that enable us to process stress without being overwhelmed, so we remain grounded and unshakable. In this speech, I will break down how adopting this act-as-if approach can transform your daily experience, fostering strength, stability, and clarity by harnessing the very biology of your brain. Emotional resilience is the ability to adapt to stressful situations or crises, and one of the foundational elements behind this resilience lies within the biology of our brain, specifically in how certain neural circuits activate and regulate our emotional responses. When we talk about cultivating emotional resilience through controlled neural activation, we are referring to consciously influencing the brain's mechanisms so that it responds to challenges with stability rather than reactivity. The brain is not a static organ, it is plastic, meaning it can be shaped and reshaped by our experiences, thoughts, and behaviors. This neuroplasticity allows us to train ourselves to respond differently to stressors, creating new patterns that promote resilience over time. At the core of emotional resilience is the regulation of the amygdala, the brain's emotional center responsible for processing threats and triggering fight or flight responses. When faced with a perceived challenge or threat, the amygdala sends a signal that can activate the sympathetic nervous system, leading to heightened alertness, increased heart rate, and a flood of stress hormones like cortisol. While this response is critical for survival in dangerous situations, prolonged or excessive activation leads to anxiety, impulsivity, and emotional overwhelm, which undermine resilience. The key, then, is learning to engage the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain associated with executive functions such as decision-making, attention, and self-control, to regulate and modulate the amygdala's activity. Through intentional practices such as focused attention, cognitive reappraisal, and mindfulness, we can strengthen the connections between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. This neural pathway acts like a brake system, helping us pause, assess, and respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. For example, when you notice a stress trigger, instead of instantly reacting with frustration or anxiety, you engage your prefrontal cortex to reinterpret the situation, perhaps viewing it as a challenge rather than a threat, which diminishes the amygdala's activation and lowers the emotional intensity. This process is a form of controlled neural activation where you intentionally steer your brain's response towards calmness and clarity. The brain's reward system plays a role in cultivating resilience. Positive reinforcement strengthens adaptive behaviors, so when you successfully manage stress with composure, your brain releases dopamine, reinforcing the neural pathways that support this controlled response. Over time, these reinforced circuits become your default mode, enabling you to maintain emotional stability more effortlessly. This is why consistent practice matters. Resilience is less about a fixed trait and more about a skill you build by repeatedly activating the neural pathways that support emotional regulation. Another important factor in controlled neural activation is the role of neurochemicals beyond dopamine, such as serotonin and gamma-aminobutyric acid, GABA, which contribute to mood stabilization and inhibitory control. Practices like deep, slow breathing and meditation have been shown to increase levels of these calming neurotransmitters, effectively dampening the stress response at a physiological level. This biochemical shift facilitates a state where the brain is less likely to overreact to external stressors and more capable of maintaining equilibrium. Understanding the interplay between the autonomic nervous system's two branches, the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, is essential in cultivating resilience. While the sympathetic nervous system gears the body for action, the parasympathetic system promotes rest, recovery, and digestion. Controlled neural activation involves consciously activating the parasympathetic system through relaxation techniques, thereby counterbalancing stress and promoting a state conducive to emotional resilience. It's important to recognize that emotional resilience is not about suppressing emotions or ignoring challenges. Rather, it's about developing the neural capacity to experience emotions without being overwhelmed by them. When you cultivate resilience through controlled neural activation, you create a buffer that allows for emotional processing with clarity and composure. This means you can face adversity, setbacks, or criticism without the common pitfalls of impulsive reaction or prolonged distress. Finally, social connections and support networks also influence neural activation related to resilience. Positive social interactions stimulate the release of oxytocin, a neuropeptide that enhances feelings of trust and safety while reducing the threat response. This neurochemical effect supports the brain's ability to stay regulated under pressure. Thus, cultivating relationships and seeking supportive environments are complementary strategies to the internal work of neural regulation. By consistently practicing techniques that engage the prefrontal cortex, regulate the amygdala, optimize neurochemical balance, and activate the parasympathetic nervous system, you effectively train your brain to handle stress with greater ease. This controlled neural activation becomes the foundation for emotional resilience, enabling you to remain grounded and steady even in the face of life's inevitable challenges. Practicing consistent behavioral acting as if to rewire brain pathways is a transformative approach rooted in neuroscience and psychology that can fundamentally alter how we experience and respond to the world around us. The essence of this concept lies in deliberately adopting the behaviors, attitudes, and emotional states we aspire to embody, even before they feel natural or genuine. This intentional practice leverages the brain's remarkable capacity for neuroplasticity, the ability to reorganize and form new neural connections based on repeated experiences and behaviors. By acting as if we are calm, confident, or unaffected by disturbances, we create patterns of neural activity that eventually become ingrained, shifting our default responses toward the qualities we desire. When you consistently behave as if you are unbothered or unshaken, your brain begins to interpret these behaviors as meaningful and relevant, encouraging the strengthening of neural pathways associated with emotional regulation, self-control, and resilience. This process works similarly to how athletes train their muscles or musicians practice scales. Repetition leads to mastery. In the brain, repeated activation of certain circuits enhances synaptic connections through a process called long-term potentiation, which makes those circuits more efficient and dominant in future situations. Over time, these neural changes manifest as real shifts in how you feel and respond internally. At the heart of acting as if is the principle that behavior shapes internal experience. While it's common to believe that emotions drive actions, neuroscience shows that the reverse can also be true. Deliberately changing your behavior can influence your emotional state. For instance, adopting a posture of confidence even when you don't initially feel confident can trigger physiological changes such as increased testosterone and decreased cortisol, hormones linked to assertiveness and stress reduction, respectively. This phenomenon is sometimes called embodied cognition, where the body's actions send feedback to the brain, shaping thoughts and feelings. This feedback loop is powerful because it bypasses the often unconscious patterns that keep us stuck in reactive or negative emotional states. Instead of waiting for feelings of calm or strength to arise spontaneously, you actively generate them through consistent behavioral choices. When you practice acting as if, you essentially send a message to your brain that the desired state is the new normal, prompting it to adapt accordingly. This is how new habits, mindsets, and identities are formed neurologically. The process of acting as if serves as a form of exposure training for the brain. By repeatedly placing yourself in the mental and behavioral space of being unbothered, your neural circuits become desensitized to triggers that once caused distress or agitation. This desensitization occurs because the brain learns through experience that these situations do not necessitate the same intense stress responses, reducing the amygdala's tendency to overreact. In this way, acting as if not only rewires pathways for calm and control, but also diminishes the power of old, maladaptive neural patterns. Consistency is crucial in this process. Sporadic or half-hearted attempts at acting as if are unlikely to produce lasting change because neural rewiring depends on repetition and reinforcement. The brain favors pathways that are frequently activated. Without regular practice, the old neural circuits retain their dominance. Therefore, integrating this practice into daily life through conscious posture, tone of voice, thought patterns, and emotional regulation techniques builds the foundation for a new default state of being. Importantly, acting as if does not mean pretending to be something you are not in a way that creates inner conflict or denial. Rather, it is about aligning your external behaviors with the qualities you want to develop and signaling to your brain that these qualities are accessible and real. This alignment fosters authenticity over time because as the brain adapts, your internal experience catches up with your outward expression. You become the person you have been acting as, no longer needing the deliberate effort to maintain the facade. This practice also enhances self-efficacy, the belief in one's ability to influence outcomes and manage life's demands. As you repeatedly act as if you are strong, composed, and unaffected by distractions, you gather experiential evidence of your capacity to embody these traits. This evidence reshapes your internal narrative and boosts confidence, which further reinforces the neural pathways associated with resilience and emotional stability. Acting as if can serve as a psychological anchor in moments of uncertainty or stress. When external circumstances threaten to destabilize your equilibrium, intentionally reverting to the behaviors and mindset of being unbothered helps your brain recalibrate. This recalibration interrupts cycles of anxiety or frustration, enabling you to maintain focus and clarity. Over time, the brain internalizes this recalibration as the default response, making emotional regulation more effortless. Neuroscientific research also highlights the importance of integrating multiple sensory modalities in the acting as if process. This means engaging not only your thoughts but also your body language, facial expressions, and vocal tone. Each of these elements sends feedback to the brain and contributes to the strengthening of desired neural networks. The more comprehensive the behavioral enactment, the more robust the neural rewiring. In essence, by embracing consistent acting as if behaviors, you harness the brain's adaptive power to cultivate new emotional and psychological realities. This intentional practice reshapes your neural architecture to support resilience, calmness, and confidence, allowing you to navigate life's challenges with greater ease and stability. Separating stimulus from reaction to maintain inner calm is a crucial skill for developing emotional intelligence and resilience, and it is deeply rooted in how our brain processes information. In many situations, we encounter external events or stimuli that can trigger automatic or behavioral reactions. These reactions often arise from the brain's rapid, unconscious processing pathways designed for quick survival decisions. However, these instinctive responses are not always the most constructive or adaptive in our modern lives. The key to maintaining inner calm lies in learning how to insert a conscious pause between the stimulus, the external event, and our reaction, enabling us to choose responses aligned with our values and goals rather than habitual patterns. At the neurological level, the brain processes stimuli through multiple pathways. The fastest is often called the low road, where sensory input reaches the amygdala almost instantly, triggering an immediate emotional reaction such as fear, anger, or anxiety. This fast pathway evolved to protect us from immediate threats, allowing rapid defensive actions. However, the speed of this response comes at the cost of precision and context. Because the low road bypasses the brain's higher-order thinking regions, it can produce reactions that are disproportionate or inappropriate to the actual situation. In contrast, the high road pathway routes sensory information through the prefrontal cortex, the brain's executive center responsible for reasoning, evaluation, and regulation. This slower pathway allows for conscious appraisal and interpretation of the stimulus, giving us the ability to modulate or override the initial emotional response. The prefrontal cortex can assess whether the perceived threat is real or exaggerated, weigh consequences, and decide on a measured response. Cultivating the habit of engaging this high road is fundamental to separating stimulus from reaction. This separation creates a mental space often called the pause, which functions as a buffer between what happens around us and how we respond internally. Developing this pause requires awareness and deliberate practice. Mindfulness meditation, for example, trains individuals to observe their thoughts, emotions, and sensations non-judgmentally as they arise, thereby enhancing the capacity to witness automatic reactions without immediately acting on them. This observational stance disrupts habitual reaction loops and allows for more intentional responses. Physiologically, this pause also influences the autonomic nervous system. When the amygdala triggers an immediate stress response, the sympathetic nervous system activates, preparing the body for fight, flight, or freeze. By consciously inserting a pause, we can engage the parasympathetic nervous system, which promotes relaxation and restoration. Techniques such as slow diaphragmatic breathing during the pause help reduce heart rate, lower cortisol levels, and shift the brain state from reactive to calm and focused. Training oneself to separate stimulus from reaction is not about suppressing emotions or becoming indifferent to what happens. Rather, it's about gaining mastery over how emotions are processed and expressed. When you react impulsively, emotions often dictate your behavior, leading to regrets or conflict. But when you pause, you give yourself the opportunity to respond with clarity, empathy, and strategic thinking. This is especially important in interpersonal situations where quick, unfiltered reactions can damage relationships or escalate conflicts. This skill also has profound implications for mental health. Many anxiety disorders, mood disturbances, and stress-related conditions stem from an inability to regulate emotional reactions effectively. By practicing separation of stimulus and reaction, individuals reduce the frequency and intensity of emotional hijacking, which can alleviate symptoms and improve overall well-being. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, a widely used psychological intervention, often incorporates techniques to increase awareness of automatic thoughts and reactions, thereby promoting this separation. In addition to formal practices, everyday life offers countless opportunities to practice this skill. When you notice a stressful email, a critical comment, or a frustrating situation, you can consciously remind yourself to pause before responding. This moment of reflection might be as brief as a few seconds, but it activates higher cognitive functions and interrupts the chain of automatic reactions. Over time, this habit becomes ingrained, leading to a more stable emotional baseline. Neuroscience also reveals that repeated use of the pause strengthens the neural circuits associated with executive control and emotional regulation. The more you practice this separation, the more accessible and automatic it becomes, effectively rewiring the brain for resilience. This means that maintaining inner calm in challenging situations is not simply a matter of willpower, it is a skill developed through consistent neural training. Furthermore, separating stimulus from reaction empowers you to shift your perspective and interpret situations differently. Since the reaction often depends on the meaning assigned to the stimulus, you gain the ability to reframe events in a way that reduces their emotional impact. This cognitive flexibility is a hallmark of psychological resilience and is closely linked to activating the prefrontal cortex's regulatory functions. In practical terms, this skill enhances decision-making, problem-solving, and interpersonal communication. When you respond rather than react, you engage in thoughtful choices that align with long-term objectives rather than short-term impulses. This leads to better outcomes, reduced stress, and a greater sense of personal agency. Mastering the separation of stimulus and reaction is about reclaiming control over your inner experience. It allows you to navigate life's uncertainties and challenges with composure and clarity, preserving your mental and emotional equilibrium. This conscious distinction between what happens and how you respond is a powerful tool for personal growth and sustained well-being. Understanding the power of perception in shaping emotional responses is a foundational concept in both psychology and neuroscience, and it plays a pivotal role in how we learn to act as if nothing bothers us. Perception is not merely a passive reception of external stimuli, rather, it is an active process by which our brain interprets and assigns meaning to the information it receives. This interpretive process directly influences our emotional reactions and behavioral outcomes. When we realize that our feelings are not dictated by events themselves, but by how we perceive those events, we unlock the ability to change our internal experiences by altering our perceptions. At the core of this process is the brain's complex system of filters and biases developed through past experiences, cultural conditioning, and personal beliefs. These filters act as lenses through which we view the world, coloring the way we interpret events. For example, two people might experience the same setback, yet one feels devastated while the other remains composed and focused. This difference arises because their brains assign different meanings to the stimulus based on individual perception. Understanding this reveals that emotional turmoil often stems from subjective interpretation rather than objective reality. Our perceptions are influenced by the brain's predictive nature. The brain is constantly making predictions about what will happen next based on prior information, and these predictions shape our conscious experience. When reality matches the brain's expectations, we feel a sense of stability and control. However, when there is a mismatch, uncertainty and emotional distress can arise. This predictive processing framework highlights how our brains can be retrained to expect calmness and resilience rather than distress and reactivity. By consciously shifting perception toward neutral or positive interpretations, we recalibrate the brain's predictive models, reducing the emotional charge of events. The power of perception also ties closely to the concept of cognitive appraisal, where we evaluate the significance of a stimulus for our well-being. This appraisal determines whether we label an event as threatening, challenging, or benign. When we learn to appraise situations as less threatening or personally significant, our emotional responses diminish in intensity. This cognitive shift is the foundation for acting as if nothing bothers you. By altering the appraisal process, you train your brain to react less intensely, which translates into a more stable and unshaken demeanor. Perception is deeply intertwined with attention, and where we focus our attention plays a crucial role in shaping our emotional state. The brain's attentional networks determine which stimuli receive cognitive resources and which are ignored. By deliberately directing attention away from perceived threats or annoyances and toward constructive or neutral aspects of a situation, we influence the emotional response. This attentional control becomes a powerful tool in managing reactions. It allows us to choose what to engage with mentally and emotionally, effectively filtering out disturbances that might otherwise provoke upset. Neuroscientifically, the modulation of perception involves the prefrontal cortex interacting with limbic structures like the amygdala, which is central to emotional processing. When the prefrontal cortex exerts top-down control over the amygdala, it can dampen emotional reactions triggered by perception. This neural mechanism is what underlies the ability to stay calm in the face of provocation or stress. Strengthening this pathway through repeated practice of perception shifting strategies enhances emotional regulation capacities over time. Another dimension of perception's power lies in the role of language and internal dialogue. The words and narratives we use to describe experiences influence how the brain encodes and recalls emotional events. Reframing negative self-talk and descriptions of events can alter the brain's perception of those events, leading to reduced emotional impact. This linguistic influence underscores why affirmations, positive self-statements, and deliberate narrative change are effective components of acting as if you are unaffected by challenges. The impact of perception also extends into social contexts. Our interpretations of others' intentions, actions, or words profoundly affect our emotional responses. Misperceptions can lead to unnecessary conflict, resentment, or hurt feelings. Learning to adopt more neutral or charitable interpretations of others' behaviors diminishes emotional reactivity and fosters greater interpersonal calm and stability. Importantly, perception is not fixed, it is malleable and can be trained through intentional mental practices. Techniques such as cognitive reframing, mindfulness, and meditation cultivate awareness of automatic perceptual patterns and enable conscious modification. This training helps break habitual negative perception loops and encourages more adaptive, balanced ways of interpreting experiences. The power of perception also influences physiological responses. When we perceive a situation as threatening, the body's stress response activates, releasing hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. Conversely, perceiving the same situation as manageable or insignificant prevents or mitigates these stress responses. Thus, by changing perception, we not only alter our emotional state but also our physiological state, contributing to overall health and resilience. This understanding invites a shift from feeling like a passive victim of external circumstances to becoming an active architect of your internal reality. By mastering how you perceive events, you gain control over your emotional landscape and begin to embody the state of being unbothered. This transformation is empowering because it moves the source of peace and stability from external conditions to internal mastery, which is within your sphere of influence. Practically, this means developing habits that continuously challenge and adjust your perceptions. Instead of accepting initial interpretations, you pause to question, reflect, and consider alternative perspectives. This cognitive flexibility becomes the foundation for emotional freedom and composure. Over time, these shifts in perception accumulate, rewiring neural pathways and creating a default mode of calm, grounded presence even in the face of challenges. Taking responsibility for your emotional state is a transformative practice that fundamentally shifts how you experience life and interact with the world around you. It means recognizing that, regardless of external circumstances, you hold the power to choose your reactions and manage your internal environment. This mindset is crucial for learning to act as if nothing bothers you because it places the locus of control squarely within yourself, rather than in the hands of others or unpredictable events. When you accept full responsibility for your emotional state, you reclaim agency over your mental and emotional well-being, enabling a profound sense of freedom and stability. At the core of this responsibility is the understanding that emotions are not passive occurrences, but active responses that you can influence through conscious choice. While it is natural and human to feel upset, frustrated, or anxious in response to challenges, allowing these feelings to dictate your behavior without reflection or regulation leads to reactive patterns that undermine peace and resilience. Taking responsibility means acknowledging your role in how you process, interpret, and express emotions, rather than blaming external factors or other people for how you feel. This does not mean denying or suppressing emotions. Rather, it means embracing them with awareness and then deciding how to respond constructively. Emotional responsibility involves cultivating self-awareness, which allows you to notice the early signs of emotional disturbance before they escalate. By tuning into your bodily sensations, thoughts, and feelings, you create the space needed to intervene consciously. This early recognition is the foundation for choosing responses aligned with your goals and values rather than habitual or impulsive reactions. A key aspect of this practice is developing emotional regulation skills. These include techniques such as mindful breathing, cognitive reframing, and grounding exercises that help modulate the intensity of emotions and maintain composure. When you take responsibility for your emotional state, you actively engage in these regulation strategies, knowing that they empower you to shift from reactivity to calmness. This active engagement contrasts sharply with passivity or victimhood, where emotions feel overwhelming and uncontrollable. Taking responsibility also requires a shift in mindset from external victimization to internal mastery. It means moving away from narratives that portray you as at the mercy of others' actions, circumstances, or random events. Instead, you cultivate a narrative that emphasizes your ability to choose your attitude and responses regardless of what happens around you. This shift fosters resilience and mental toughness, as you no longer expend energy resisting or resenting what you cannot control, but focus on managing your inner state. Neuroscientifically, this sense of responsibility activates brain regions associated with executive function, such as the prefrontal cortex, which governs decision-making and self-control. When you consciously choose how to respond emotionally, you strengthen these neural pathways, making it easier over time to maintain emotional stability, even in challenging situations. This neuroplasticity underscores that emotional responsibility is a skill that can be developed and enhanced through practice. This approach also impacts relationships positively. When you take responsibility for your emotions, you reduce blame and defensiveness, creating space for more authentic and compassionate communication. Others are less likely to feel attacked or responsible for your feelings, which fosters healthier interpersonal dynamics. Additionally, modeling emotional responsibility encourages those around you to develop similar skills, contributing to a more emotionally intelligent community. Taking responsibility for your emotional state encourages self-compassion as well. It involves recognizing that while you have control over your responses, you are also human and will sometimes struggle or falter. This compassionate stance prevents harsh self-judgment and supports persistence in developing emotional mastery. It balances accountability with kindness, creating a sustainable path toward acting as if nothing bothers you. In practical terms, this means regularly checking in with yourself about how you are feeling and what thoughts or beliefs may be influencing your emotional state. It involves asking reflective questions such as, is my reaction proportionate to this situation? Or what can I do right now to calm my mind and body? These questions shift focus from external blame to internal management and empower you to take constructive action. Taking responsibility for your emotional state fosters a proactive risk approach, rather than reactive life stance. Instead of waiting for external events to dictate your mood or behavior, you develop routines and habits that nurture emotional resilience, such as regular mindfulness practice, physical exercise, and healthy social connections. These proactive measures build a foundation of stability that makes it easier to remain unbothered by external disturbances. This mindset is a cornerstone for emotional freedom. It breaks the cycle of dependence on external validation or control and centers power within yourself. When you own your emotional state, you become the architect of your inner world, capable of maintaining peace and clarity regardless of external chaos. This empowerment is essential for sustained mental health and personal growth. Setting clear boundaries is an essential practice for maintaining emotional stability and cultivating the ability to act as if nothing bothers you. Boundaries serve as the invisible lines that define what you are willing to accept and tolerate from others and from situations. They protect your mental and emotional well-being by limiting exposure to negativity, disrespect, and undue stress. Without clear boundaries, it becomes easy to absorb the emotional turmoil around you, leading to overwhelm, resentment, and a diminished sense of control. Establishing and enforcing boundaries is a proactive step that safeguards your peace and empowers you to respond to life with calmness and strength. Boundaries operate on multiple levels: physical, emotional, mental, and social, and each dimension plays a role in how you manage your energy and interactions. Physically, boundaries might mean limiting who has access to your personal space or time. Emotionally, boundaries involve deciding which feelings you allow to affect you and how you engage with the emotional states of others. Mentally, boundaries include protecting your thoughts and beliefs from external negativity or manipulation. Socially, boundaries help you choose which relationships and social engagements align with your values and contribute positively to your life. The clarity of boundaries begins with self-awareness and self-respect. You cannot set effective boundaries unless you first understand your own limits, values, and needs. This requires reflection on what situations or behaviors trigger discomfort, anxiety, or distress. By identifying these triggers, you gain insight into where boundaries need to be drawn. Self-respect is the internal validation that your feelings and needs are legitimate and worthy of protection. When you respect yourself, you are less likely to allow others to cross your boundaries or to tolerate treatment that undermines your well-being. Communicating boundaries clearly and assertively is critical. It is not enough to simply know your limits internally. You must express them to others in a way that is direct yet respectful. This communication signals to others how you expect to be treated and what behaviors are unacceptable. Assertive communication avoids aggression or passivity. It is grounded in honesty and calm confidence. For example, saying, "I am not available to discuss this right now," or "I prefer not to engage in negative conversation," sets a firm boundary without creating conflict. Enforcing boundaries consistently is equally important. Boundaries lose their effectiveness if they are not upheld. This may involve saying no to requests that drain your energy, limiting contact with toxic individuals, or removing yourself from harmful environments. Consistency teaches others that your boundaries are non-negotiable and must be respected. It also reinforces your own commitment to maintaining your emotional health. While enforcing boundaries can be challenging, especially if others resist or react negatively, it is a necessary step in preserving your stability and autonomy. The benefits of setting boundaries extend beyond immediate emotional protection. They create space for personal growth and fulfillment. When you are not constantly managing the emotional fallout from boundary violations, you can invest more energy into your goals, relationships, and self-care. Boundaries help you prioritize your well-being, leading to improved focus, reduced stress, and greater overall satisfaction. They also foster healthier relationships by clarifying expectations and reducing resentment or misunderstandings. Psychologically, boundaries help regulate the brain's stress response by limiting exposure to triggers that activate fear or anxiety circuits. When boundaries are respected, the brain experiences less threat, which lowers cortisol levels and promotes a state of calm. This physiological effect reinforces the emotional benefits of boundaries and makes it easier to maintain composure and resilience. Socially, boundaries function as a filter that determines the quality of your interactions. They help you surround yourself with supportive, positive influences rather than draining or harmful ones. This selective social engagement nurtures an environment where you can thrive emotionally and mentally. Boundaries also prevent codependency and enable healthier interdependence, where relationships are based on mutual respect and autonomy rather than imbalance or control. Setting boundaries also involves managing internal boundaries related to self-talk and mental limits. This means being vigilant about negative or intrusive thoughts and choosing not to engage with mental narratives that diminish your confidence or peace. Internal boundaries are about cultivating a mindset that supports your emotional stability and acts as a buffer against self-sabotage or rumination. The process of setting and maintaining boundaries is dynamic and requires ongoing attention. Life circumstances change, relationships evolve, and personal needs shift, so boundaries may need to be reassessed and adjusted regularly. This flexibility ensures that your boundaries remain relevant and effective in protecting your well-being as you grow. Learning to set boundaries is a practice of empowerment. It affirms your right to emotional safety and control, which is foundational to acting as if nothing bothers you. By clearly defining and defending your limits, you create a psychological and emotional fortress that allows you to face life's challenges with greater confidence, calmness, and strength. Boundaries are not barriers to connection, but rather the framework that makes genuine, healthy connection possible.